So we're now joined by Gabriel Sherman. He is a Vanity Fair special correspondent, also author of the New York Times bestseller, The Loudest Voice in the Room. And as I just mentioned, is out with a new movie on the origin story of Donald Trump called The Apprentice, which will be in theaters nationwide this Friday. Welcome, Gabe. Nice to have you here.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me.
So let's go ahead and take a look. We got a little bit of the trailer of this movie to give people a little taste. Let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Yes.
This is Donald Trump from Mr. Cohen. Thank you so much.
Donald who?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Roy Cohn, nice to meet you.
You, Roy Cohn, you're brutal.
If you're indicted, you're invited.
I know I'm Donald.
You have a big ass. You got to work on that.
Your face looked like an orange.
You have to be willing to do anything to win.
All right, so for better or worse, this is a man we all know very intimately at this point, more than we ever wanted to know about him. So what did you want to communicate in this film that we don't already know about Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think, you talk about things that we know. That really, I think, was referring to information. I think what's so revelatory about this movie is that it is an experience. This is not about, if you want to learn facts about Donald Trump, anybody can read Wikipedia and find out information. This movie is a really emotional roller coaster ride about how he came from his, kind of anonymous Queens background and set himself on the course to becoming president. It's the origin story. It's a Frankenstein story about how Roy Cohn, played brilliantly by Jeremy Strong from Succession, taught Donald Trump the lessons, molded his personality in a way that he displays every day today. The movie ends in 1987, so it doesn't touch anything to do with current events. But over these 2 hours, you see all of the lessons that when you watch the news today, you'll have an entirely new understanding of how Donald Trump, why and how he talks the way he does. It's really the ghost of Roy Cohn speaking through Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've recommended your book at the top of our show today, The Loudest Voice in the Room, and with this movie, could you talk about some of the lessons maybe that you brought from reporting for so many years on Roger Ailes into Donald Trump and that monoculture era, how they both of these two characters kind of formed to become so influential?
Yeah, I mean, both are obviously, Ailes and Trump are larger than life. I think they're both sort of Shakespearean characters who, have these operatic rises and falls. And Roy Cohn, who was Donald Trump's mentor, is one of the most significant figures of the 20th century. His shadow continues to loom over all of us today. The scorched earth politics, the zero-sum politics, the idea that you never admit defeat, you never back down, and you always counterattack. All the things that we see transpiring in our politics today are the lessons that Roy Cohn taught Donald Trump. So I really think this is a movie where you go on this crazy roller coaster ride with these two characters through the gritty underbelly of New York City in the 1970s. And you see Donald Trump slowly over the course of this movie going from kind of an insecure, awkward son of a real estate developer, to becoming this kind of egomaniacal personality. It's an incredible transformation. And Sebastian Stan, from all of the Marvel movies, disappears into this role as Donald Trump. I got to know Sebastian well during the shooting. And when I was on set, it was really uncanny because I've spent a lot of time with the real Donald Trump. And there were just moments where I forgot I was even watching an actor.
Wow. Cool.
So Donald Trump is obviously the most divisive figure in American politics, but one of the most divisive figures probably in political history. How did you navigate the politics of this? In other words, is this just a movie for resistance libs, or do you think that there are some Republican Trump supporters who might get something out of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think it's a question that kind of animated this entire project when I started writing it in the spring of 2017. I wanted to write a movie that was a film, not propaganda, it wasn't trying to advance one side or the other. It's a movie where I, as a writer, was trying to understand what is the backstory? How did this person who, is looming so large in our life on our TV screens every day, where did he come from? What are the forces that actually shaped his personality? And so, there are parts of this movie where, hashtag resistance members would be, saying why this movie's, too sympathetic to Donald Trump. And I'm sure there's aspects of the film where, people in the MAGA world will say that it doesn't, fit their image of Trump as the second coming. And that's okay. I think what I'm so fascinated by is I want people to experience this movie and they can take away really whatever they want from it. It's not a takedown of Donald Trump, and it's not a love letter. It's really trying to treat him like a movie character. It's so interesting about our politics today where things are so polarized, because if you take, look at these kind of legendary, iconic movies that tried to capture a certain subculture or a world, like The Godfather per se, right? We don't say, is The Godfather an anti-mob movie or a pro-mob movie? We all talk about it as this iconic movie, and these Michael Corleone and are these larger than life characters. And that's what I was trying to do with this film. I think of Donald Trump, regardless of what you think of his politics, is he's this, epic character that has changed the culture. And so I think he's worthy of a cinematic treatment in the same way that any other, great movie character is.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I think he sees himself that way in some aspects, which is why I was interested. Let's put F2, please, on the screen. As the movie has debuted, they've apparently sent a cease and desist letter to try and block the film's release. What do you think is behind that exactly? As you said, you've interviewed Donald Trump before. You spent time around his people. What's the impetus behind the cease and desist?
Well, two things. First of all, he hasn't seen the movie. No one in his campaign, to my knowledge, has seen the movie when this letter was released that you're putting up on the screen.
Yeah.
This was hours after the movie had its world premiere at the Cannes Film Festival in May. So that was the first time anybody outside of our filmmaking team had seen this film. Donald Trump clearly hadn't seen it. So this was just sort of sight unseen, firing off a letter. And in fact, I was kind of laughing at the time because it was an instance of really life was imitating art, because in the film, Roy Cohn teaches young Donald Trump the number one lesson, which is always to go on the attack. And so this cease and desist letter was the perfect real life example of that. What I think is going on there, I mean, he hasn't seen the film. So, they're launching this attack without really having any real information. So I hope, I guess my wish is that people reserve judgment and they're welcome to weigh in, but weigh in after you see the movie. Don't just attack something that you haven't seen.
Sure.
I know you say the film ends before the current political moment, and the film focuses on kind of the psychological forces and character influences on Donald Trump's personality. But I wonder if you also put thought into the cultural moment that also helps to enable Donald Trump's rise to become, very unlikely president of the United States.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the movie, yes, it explores this intimate relationship between Roy Cohn and his protege, his apprentice, Donald Trump, which is the inspiration for the title of the film. But it really also exposes the system of corruption and the rise of media and tabloid culture in New York City in the 1970s and the 1980s, which Donald Trump really learned how to harness. There's this great scene in the film where Donald Trump's mother is reading a New York Times profile of Trump, which was the first major newspaper profile of Trump that was published in 1976. And she's sitting with him in the family living room, and she's reading how the New York Times writer compares Trump to, quote, Robert Redford, and how good looking he was. And I was struck because that scene is based on the actual real article. I just quoted verbatim from what the New York Times wrote about Donald Trump in 1976. So the irony is that, Trump bashes the media, Trump attacks the failing New York Times. And yet this movie really shows how the mass media culture of the 1970s and 80s was responsible for building up the myth of Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump benefited from the media.
I want to run by you this theory that I have about Trump and his evolution since he burst on the political scene. I mean, he'd been sort of in the political scenes before this, but in 2016. In 2016, he's very clearly like a product of the tabloids, right? Sensationalist, right? Outrageous, but kind of finger on the pulse still, but, in this very tabloid way. In 2020, he feels more to me like sort of like Fox News grandpa. You know, he's been swimming in the circles of like traditional mainstream conservative Rupert Murdoch media. And then now he feels to me like Twitter under Elon. And there's a whole New York Times analysis. We actually pulled it. We can put it up on the screen. But they did a whole analysis of his speeches now versus 2016. And it's longer now, and it's angrier, and it's more rambling, and whatever. And they frame it as a question of age. That is probably part of it. But I also feel like it's also a question of the type of media that he's consuming and playing into, perhaps as much as it is a question of his age.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have sort of chronicled the last, almost decade of Trump's performance as a public figure. When I spend a lot of time with him, I found him to be, obviously, very aggressive. But I think the one thing that really enabled Trump, and especially his early political rise in 2015, 2016, was he was funny. I think humor and comedy really underpinned all of, and helped to soften his, scorched earth style of politics. And I think, unfortunately, what has happened over time as he's gotten older, or perhaps as he's only just, sort of consumed right-wing media, is that his speeches have become less, there's a less of a lightness or a comedy to them. It's just pure rage. It's pure anger. And that might appeal to the really core MAGA base. But I think the things that made Donald Trump appealing to people who didn't follow politics so closely in 2015 was the sense that he was making politics entertaining. And if you just judge him as a entertainer, he's less entertaining now. He's not as good of a performer as he was, 5-8 years ago. So I think you're onto something. And I read that Peter Baker piece in the New York Times very closely. And I thought the analysis was fascinating, how he's using angrier words. They're longer. His sentences don't track. So if he, in fact, does not win the election in November, I think one of the takeaways would be that he was just less of a skilled communicator. I think Donald Trump's communication power was so central to his rise. And if he doesn't win, it will be a sign that his communication power has faded.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. Well, I'm excited to see the film. It's out on, what did you say, Friday? All theaters?
Friday in movie theaters. Please tell your friends.
All right, I'll be there. I'll be watching with my AMC credits. So there you go. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to have you, Gabe. Thank you.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.